This is a man who he's changed a lot of people on this line right now in life with his technology. I mean, he's one of my favorite teachers. He's he, he's he's a lot warmer than people think he is. I don't even know how to start describing Richard to you. I mean, I started with him probably in kindergarten. What you gonna do, Richard? I need to do something. Oh, unmute me. He's asking to be unmuted. I started Richard probably in kindergarten and went all the way to grade school with him, grad school, and we were talking before we even came on, and he was remembering things we did way back, things I forgot all about. But this is a man that I truly adore, I truly respect, I have a lot of love for because he taught me things that changed my life and helped me change a lot of people's lives, which we're still changing today, to this day. Because of him, a lot of you know what you know, and you've been able to go out there and change lives because of what I taught you, because of what he taught me. So to have him on during our first anniversary and during the launching of his book, Legacy of the Master, is just a great opportunity, a great privilege for me personally to have Richard Bandler, he's told me today this is his 35th book, and he's still working on another one. I'm gonna put it out there. I would love for Richard to consider doing a book with NLP and energy medicine that I can combine with him to do something. I'm just putting it out there.
You're supposed to do that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, will you reread it for me? Will you edit it and look at it then?
You bet. You bet I would.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna put together a book with NLP and energy medicine combined, and then I'll send it to Richard for his approval. So Richard Bandler, how are you this evening? I'm so excited. I'm really excited about this.
I'm really very good. It's very nice to see you again, Jeff. I've known you for decades and decades and decades.
You got to add one more to that. I started with my first certification with you was in 1989. That's a long time.
Yeah, well, I've been at this 53 years, so I try to keep track of everyone I can. And you know, you at least haven't moved all over the world. Some of my students keep moving around. But
well, maybe I need to move around some more so I can get some more information, more education from different parts of the world, grow more culturally.
Well, I don't know. I just had a friend out from New York, and he arrived in a very thick, heavy jacket. It was 70 degrees here today, and I'm so grateful.
Yes, it's cold here, Richard. It really is. So the way we're going to do this tonight is I'm going to ask him some questions first. If you have any questions, you'll prepare them. I told you ahead of time to prepare any questions you have. The way you're going to ask your question is, here's the format. My question is, I don't want the narrative telling me a life story and then ask your question. The format will be, my question is, and you ask Richard directly the question. Okay, agreed upon? My question is the way we're going to start the questions. In the meantime, I'm just going to ask you some questions to get it started. Like, talk about a little bit, can you give them a little bit about the old days of NLP, Richard? Just, a minute or so on the old days of NLP and when you got started, how you got started, what made you decide to do it, the problems you ran into, the challenges you ran into.
Well, when I started out, there were 160 schools of psychotherapy, all claiming that they had the right approach, when systematically none of them could repeat a result about anything at any time, which is a really bad track record. I don't think there's any other field that has a track record that poor. Even anthropologists are more systematic than psychotherapists were. And I inadvertently, because I was a mathematician by trade, when I was in college, lived in a house owned by a psychiatrist and started reading the books that were in his house. And it had a lot of things that told you, how to look for what went wrong, but nothing that told you what to do about it other than to take drugs. And being a psychiatrist, he had a lot of pharmacological books. And, back in those days, they had the DSM-1, which was only about this thick and had all the psychiatric disorders. And then the DSM-2 came out and it was thicker, and the DSM-3 was 2 volumes. And now I think it's an encyclopedia of names of things that can be wrong with you. But I don't focus on what can go wrong with you. The only thing that interested me is that every now and then people got results. And I wanted to know the difference between when people made changes and when they didn't. How do you get over a problem or get to a solution? And when I met John Grinder, we got together. He's probably the world's best syntactician and had a vast knowledge of transformational grammar. And we built something called the meta model, which is now taught all over the world to people. And it's a problem-solving machine, and got us to focus in the right places to find out how people thought that got them over problems, as opposed to how they thought that just continued them. And if you change the way you think, it changes how you feel, and therefore changes entirely what you're capable of doing. I searched through every psychotherapy, every psychic, everything under the sun, and built models of what worked. And they're basically personal algorithms that people can apply. And I kept trying to simplify it and re-simplify it. In 1985, I recoded the whole thing into the model of submodalities, which made it very easy for people to make changes that would stay with them for the rest of their life in a short period of time rather than a long period of time. I also started modeling other things, how people, what's the difference between very successful salespeople and people who aren't, and scientists and bootmakers and everything under the sun. The same tools I use to model psychotherapy, I've used for many, many things. I worked for the military for a long time, designing training programs so that they would hit what they were aiming at rather than each other, which I always thought was a wonderful idea. We literally cut down the cost of ammunition, by about 80% and increased accuracy by hundreds of percents. And, we did all kinds of projects, and I worked with intelligence organizations and big businesses. And basically, my career has been to be a glorified efficiency expert. The currency of living for a human being is how you spend your time. And the more of it you waste thinking in ways that don't work, the less of it you'll have to enjoy. And if you spend more of your day unhappy and miserable than you do, being enthusiastic and exciting, you're just doing the wrong thing. And
you know what? I should have started by asking this question, because everybody has a different definition of NLP. I have a very simplified definition, but I also have the definition that you taught me. So I'm going to ask you, the co-founder of NLP, what's your definition of NLP?
Well, it's the study of the structure of conscious thought and how it influences you. And that subjectivity itself has never really been studied. It's always been considered a bad thing. But the conscious mind and the way we think determines how our neurology functions and how we build neurocortical pathways. So, it's all about using language itself, either in yourself or another person, to change neurology so that you build permanent solutions to problems. So that instead of just modeling the world and getting stuck in that model, you have a model that you can test and open up and have new abilities and learn faster and enjoy more things and explore the world better. In my first book, I laid out the 3 universals of human modeling. And people often ask where I got it from, and the truth is I made it up. That the difference between the structure of how we think, the model of the world we build, it always has to be different. To begin with, it can't be the size of the world, because we'd have to stick a whole planet in our head, and 5 billion people. So we have to shrink things down. We have to do all of these things. We have to distort the world through our senses. And the brain is basically designed to make things familiar, so we can either move towards them or move away from them. And NLP is the study of how to do that more efficiently and productively and on purpose.
So if someone's studying, what's the most unused technique per se? It's not really a technique, process in NLP that should be used more often. In other words, what's the secret sauce that will make you a good practitioner?
Well, the secret sauce is to understand that everything has a purpose. And when it ceases to serve that purpose, it's time to replace it with something. You have to take something away and put something in its place. Neurologically, you never take anything away, you put something on top of it. You don't get rid of neurocortical pathways. You layer others on top of them. And, as much as they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, the truth is you can learn your entire life and build cortical pathways. That's just stupid. And I had a dog training school for a while. And by the way, you can teach old dogs new tricks. And that's both dogs and humans. That it just requires good training. Most practitioners learn a bunch of techniques and they try to squeeze everybody into those techniques rather than finding out from the person and building a protocol that fits that person and answering the big four questions. And, what is it that you want that you don't have? What is it you don't want that you do have? And then what is it you don't want and you don't have? And in fact, don't even suspect. That would change everything. And that third one is where I focus most of my time. Because when I ask people questions, I'm not just listening for what is there, I'm listening for what they don't suspect. And most of the time, that's what makes my job easy.
Can you repeat those, though, for the people that are trying to write things down? Can you repeat those three again?
Well, those three, you either want things and you don't have them. People come into me and they go, I want to be happy. And I say to them, all you need is 6 more dwarves and an unconscious woman. And, because, if people, or you have something you don't want, people say, I have depression. And I go, put it on the table. They can't do it, because it's a verb, not a noun. And when you get people to start describing the process by which they get depressed, they take control of it. And the third one is when people come in and they talk about it, there are things that just aren't in their model of the world. The model of the world has the territory of what you understand, what you can do, what you do believe. All of those things are in your neurological neural nets. And but there's a lot of stuff that's outside it. I call that territorizing. And when you get people to territorize, to use their senses to take in new information so that they change their beliefs, they change their understanding. This is when people really start learning. And this requires strategies, which is a big part of NLP.
Someone asked me if you were to, they said, Jeff, what do you think Richard would say is the most important thing to become a good NLP practitioner? And I said, wait and ask Richard. But since I've already brought it up, you can answer the question if you will. What do you think it takes to be a good NLP practitioner?
Attention to detail and tenacity. Because NLP is not just a series of techniques. It's a methodology. And that methodology requires tenacity and requires that, most of these techniques that people say is what the body of NLP came because I listened and watched people. When I wanted to figure out what to do about phobias, I got 100 people that had phobias and got over them without psychotherapy. I put an ad in the newspaper and interviewed them and found what was similar between all of them, and then went and took a psychiatrist, brought me clients with all different kinds of phobias, and we did it, and it seemed to work with everything but heights. And so I went back and found people with a phobia of heights and found out what they did to stop being afraid of heights. That the solutions are out there. The question is the solution in, see, there was an idea in psychology that if you understood how you got screwed up, magically you would end up okay. And
Yeah,
it's
right.
a great idea, it just doesn't work. And they tried it for 100 years, and whether you call it Freudianism or whether you call it Gestalt therapy, it was all about insight. That insight produces change. So you went on this archaeological dig into the history of a person to find out where bad stuff had it and had them relive it and cathart it away and go, aha, and then, cry and beat up a few pillows. And that was supposed to make you, be a functional human being. And I don't think it works that way. I think people need knowledge. And this requires that sometimes that knowledge comes from other people. When I had somebody who was very frustrated, he wanted to learn to play the guitar. And I asked him, I said, how are you going about it? And he goes, I'm watching, YouTube videos. And I said, are you holding a guitar while you do this? And he said, but no, he said, I take notes. And I said, well, the guitar is something you feel. And if you can't see a fretboard in your mind and know where your fingers are supposed to go, how are they supposed to know? And, great guitar players have a fretboard in their mind and they memorize the scales and the patterns and the chords and all of those things and melodies. And if they hear a melody, they see their fingers move on the fretboard in their head. And if you go about it that way, one time many years ago, I was walking down the Thames in London and a guy was drawing a tree on the other side of the river. And it was perfect. I mean, it was perfect. It was almost a photograph. And I walked up and I asked him, I said, how are you getting the tree onto the easel? And, and this was just pencil drawing. This wasn't even painting. And the guy said to me, he goes, well, this might sound weird. And I said, you have no idea who you're talking to. He said, there is a giant pencil next to the tree, that I can see, and a wire that comes across the river to my hand, so that as the hand draws the tree, my hand moves on the paper. Now, when I was in school and they wanted us to draw, they just handed us a pencil and pointed at the paper and said, draw fruit and put a bowl of fruit in front of us. But that doesn't teach you the how part of it. And when you get the how part of it, you have something that allows you to acquire information. That when, because there isn't just one strategy for art, there are all kinds of strategies for art, a lot of strategies for music, a lot of strategies for poetry, dancing, everything that human beings engage in. We have to have some kind of mental representation. They don't even teach kids in school how to memorize, but they ask them to all the time. And they don't teach them how to spell, or, they teach you to spell phonetically, which can't even be spelled phonetically. It's ludicrous. It's phonics. And, once people, if you go and find a great speller that won a spelling bee for the state, which is what I did, little girl, and, and asked her, how to spell a word, and she started to bark out the letters. I said, no, tell me the letters. Do you know how to spell it? They said, yes. And I said, how do you know? She goes, I can see it in my mind. And I went, how big are the letters? And they were this big, They looked at the little letters on the paper and then made big ones in their head, and then looked at them forwards and backwards, looked away, said the word came up, they looked at it, it matched. And that was how they learned to spell words. And, if you give you a list and you say to a kid, memorize them, especially if you try to memorize them phonetically, there are words, especially in English, it's the language witches made.
Now, Richard, that strategy and
after C.
that strategy is in what's the name of the book that strategy is in? It's excellence in teaching, or teaching excellence or something?
Teaching excellence has, yeah.
The strategies talking about now, as far as the spelling strategies, in a book called Teaching Excellence, which you can get on Amazon, right?
Yeah, we just re-released it again, actually, on Amazon. It's a revised edition. I wrote that with Kate Benson probably 10 years ago.
Okay, just want people to know where they can get find out about that strategy.
Especially if you have kids that have any kind of learning disabilities or any of that kind of stuff. It's an excellent book. Kate Benson, taught in the school system for years, worked with all kinds of learning disabilities, and tested everything out. But, this is about learning math, learning art, learning music, all of the things that kids should be learning in school. There's a lot of stuff going on in schools now that are just time consuming and not really shouldn't be a part of the educational system. We need to teach kids to read and write and function in this world so that they can get ahead. We need to make the generation that follows us smarter than the generation that we are. That progress is built on that. We should be educating our kids not to be so opinionated, but instead, to be able to function anywhere, talk to anybody, and learn from anything that they need to, and not be so dependent on all these machines. I had a young person, in my house, and when I was talking to them, they were staring at the floor, and I said, look at me when I talk to you. And they said, people from my generation don't like eye contact. That's why texting is so important to us.
Richard, one of your other favorite topics, and I know that you're probably, in my opinion, the best in the world at, is what? Hypnosis. What is hypnosis for the people? How do you describe hypnosis? And why is that important also?
It's not, hypnosis when I grew up was all Svengali movies and mind control and blah, 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 which is nonsense. It's really super concentration. When you go into altered states, you can do things you can't do in the waking state. And part of that is because your model of the world doesn't allow it. And, when I hypnotize people, they can control their heart rate, their blood pressure. They can recall things that they've totally forgot about for years and years and years. I helped somebody find a ring once they'd lost 25 years earlier. Uh,
Wow.
and, and her and her husband were, the only reason I did it, her and her husband were still arguing about the fact she had lost her wedding ring. And, she was under the impression it had gone down the sink when she was washing the dishes, and he'd torn the plumbing apart and the sewer apart. And this had gone on, and they didn't live there. She had lived with her parents at the time. And when she, and I finally told them to shut up, and I put her in a deep trance and set up yes, no finger signals. And I said, does your unconscious know where the ring is? And I got yes. And I said, let her conscious mind know. And she goes, I dropped it in the basement. And I said, well, it's too bad you don't live there anymore. And she goes, my mother still lives there. And her mother went down the stairs with a flashlight and looked under the hot water heater and found the ring 25 years later. And your abilities, because you're focused only on one thing instead of everything. And the conscious mind is like a flashlight in a dark room. It points some places and not others. And through the altered states, which is probably a better description of what I do. I use the term hypnosis because people are familiar with it. But I did this by measuring brainwave patterns. I used something called a mind mirror, and literally would watch the brainwave patterns of people in my office so that I could tell when they went into alpha states, and when the alpha states dropped down, and when there were theta spikes, and measured states of consciousness, and found out which states of consciousness were the best ones to do things in. And, there are some states where you're more creative than others. And most people's consciousness just floats all over the place. You use hypnosis to stabilize it so that people have states of deep concentration. Most meditations do that, but they don't aim it at purpose as much as I do. To me, all of these things are to get life to be better every day, not just to go in and sit there.
Mhm. Okay, so we talked about hypnosis. We talked a little bit about hypnosis anyway, and about NLP. Is there any case that you would say was your toughest case as far as hypnosis, or just in a case in general? Do you have any cases that you think about, say, yeah, that was a real tough one? And then how did you handle the challenge that it created for you?
Well, for me, the worst case scenarios are if I don't like the client, to be honest. I find if I like the client, if the client for some reason is really objectionable, I had a guy come in, and he started making very derogatory remarks about Jews, and being Jewish, I just thought, he doesn't, an idiot doesn't realize I'm Jewish. And then when I told him, he kept doing it, and he just didn't realize, and he was just kind of a snot. And he owned a big construction company, had tons of money, and was just, he was all the things I find objectionable about a human being. So trying to help him was more difficult for me because I just really wanted to slap him. And but sometimes you just have to put aside your own bias. And I also find that hypnosis is good for this because the clients shut up, and they get to listen to me instead of me having to listen to their nonsense. Because especially if they've been in therapy, they want to tell you the stories. And
Yeah.
luckily, I'm not a therapist, so I tell them I'm not allowed to hear this stuff. I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not allowed to hear about your childhood, and and your relationship with your mother and all of that crap. I'm not allowed to know that. I'm only allowed to change your future.
Well, some NLP students have problems with that, though. They have problems with letting the person run on and on and on and on. So how would you tell them to stop a person that wants to tell their story anyway? What would your advice be to an NLP student that has the problem stopping someone from telling their story? How would they stop them?
Hair.
Pardon me?
Grow a pair.
Grow.
Sometimes you just have to be very firm with people. You have to look them in the eye and you go, do you want your life to get better or not? And they go, of course I do. And then they go, then shut up and answer my questions so that I can get the information I need to do something. that you've told lots of people this story, and
Yeah.
and sometimes you just have to be very firm. And as you know, if I need to be, I can be frightening if I have to.
Yes, I know that. I knew that before I started training with you. There was another question I had in my mind. Can't think of what it was right now. It went out my head, but it'll come back. Meta model.
Yes.
Why is the meta model so important for people to really understand and utilize?
Well, the meta model is a recursive language questioning machine. And when used properly, it takes you right up to the edge of people's model of the world. And this is why, you can tell whether somebody is properly trained because, if I ask somebody, if they go, I go, how many of you know the meta model? And I get all these people raise their hands, and I go, if somebody comes in and says they're depressed, what do you ask them? And they go, about what? And I go, do you care about what? And they go, no. And, but if you ask the big chunk questions first, like how do you know you're depressed? You start to get answers that describe how they build this state of consciousness called depression. Because if you find out how they build it, you can reverse the process and undo it. I teach them, to spend more of their time, having better states of consciousness. Because as long as they drive themselves into a state they don't want to be in, then it affects their neurochemistry, it affects their biology, it affects everything. And, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in the ultimate way you could imagine.
Richard, when I trained with you, you taught us about an attitude to have that I kind of taught my students. I'm not sure if you still teach that attitude. It goes like, something is mine.
I beg your pardon?
When I trained with you, and my training,
that part, but what was the attitude?
Your ass is mine.
Yeah. I say that to myself inside my head all the time. I may not say it out loud, but I'm thinking it every moment.
Okay.
I've worked mostly in my career for 53 years with people that were considered impossible, that were given up on by psychiatrists after psychiatrists after psychiatrists, therapists and all of this kind of stuff, and sometimes even medical doctors. And when they come in and start telling me how hopeless, they go, well, you're my last hope. I may say out loud, then you're screwed. But I'm thinking inside your head, you have no idea, your ass is mine. And if you feel that way, you don't take flack from anybody, you don't waste time, you stay on point. Because the more you tangent off, the less likely they are to go into the right state, to do the right thing, to make a permanent change and grow new cortical pathways that will allow them to escape whatever loops they're in.
Well, thank you for confirming that. So I told my students that's the attitude you taught us to have. And I taught them the attitude. And they were like, did Richard really tell you all have inside your head, your ass is mine? I said, yes, he taught us to say inside your head, your ass is mine. And then to go after it. And that with that attitude, they're going to change whether they like it or not, that they're going to change.
Well, internal dialogue determines what state you go into. And if you look at a client and say to yourself, oh shit, this is going to be really hard, you're making it a lot harder on you than if you look at them and think, well, their ass is mine. I have tools that they don't even suspect. They're going to feel so different that they're not going to know what the hell hit them and when it hit them. And that's why you can go directly after new states, because you're not worried about their personal history. This, my mommy didn't love me stuff. Don't cut it with me. And I'll look a client straight in the eye and go, I don't care. I answer my questions. And,
you hear that? You hear that? You hear that, healers? You heard what he said, right? You don't care. They think I'm cold sometimes. They've called me cold at times.
Look, how can you care about somebody if you indulge them in their own stupidity? When I was in college, I took a class because it was required and it was called peer counseling. And this Harvard professor, who came in and announces, he goes, I did my dissertation on inherently helpful people. And he said, there are 3 characteristics of inherently helpful people. They are warm, empathetic, and genuine. And I raised my hand and I said, sir, so if those 3 don't go together, you can't be helpful? And he said, what do you mean they don't go together? I said, I can be warm, empathetic, or genuine.
Mm.
And I think I'll stick with the genuine, because, I don't know how many times I've looked at a client when they're telling me about themselves and just and repeat what they say back to them and go, does that sound smart? And most of the time they will say no. When I ask somebody who's got a bad memory and they think about it every day, 2 minutes here, 3 minutes there, 5 minutes here, and 20 minutes before they go to sleep at night, and I go, if you add up all the minutes every day, is it a half hour, an hour and a half? And I've had people tell me 3 hours a day. And I'll go, well, let's do a little math. 3 hours a day. Let's see if there are 365 days in a year. We're cracking 1,000 hours a year, 10,000 in 10 years. So your plan is for the next 10 years, to spend 10,000 hours thinking about this thing that makes you feel bad. Does that sound smart? I haven't ever had anybody go, yep. It just doesn't happen. You get that sheepish no, and you go, okay. So then I can go set about making it so they don't think about it so much, which is really very easy to do. You put a border around it, and the minute you put a border around it, you're not using the same hemisphere. So you put a 2-inch border around it, you shrink it down to the size of a nickel, you blink it black and white a few times, and really fast. And then when you try to think about it, the feelings won't be attached to it. It's a neurological trick, because many of the techniques I use are neurological tricks that it hacks into the neurology and makes it so it doesn't function the same way. Where it normally would go into a loop until it habituates itself out.
The frame stops it, right?
What?
The frame stops it from going into that loop.
Well, yes, it does. Well, it stops it from, but especially if you shrink it down, you have to first stop it, and then you have to give it somewhere new to go. See, people have always gone and then gone into the loop, keep thinking about it until the nerves habituate, and then it pops back up an hour later. Whereas if you put a frame around it, shrink the frame down to the size of a nickel, and start blinking it black and white, you've stopped it and sent it in a new direction. And it's also no longer a big, giant remembered image. It now automatically shrinks itself down. It knows what to do. Because most people, when you ask them about stuff that's making them upset, it's either life size or larger than life. And of course, if you really want to scare yourself, there's nothing better than a big screen. If you want to depress yourself, nothing better than a big screen. You want to relive rape, trauma, murder, car accidents, disappointments, arguments, big screen, best thing you can have. You can manufacture endless bad feelings, but is it smart? No.
Now, self-talk, you mentioned internal dialogue. How do you tell people to handle self-talk?
Well, I teach them to control self-talk.
Okay. What about the mantra?
Well, a mantra is a way of doing it. It's a little repetitious, however. After touring India and learning 6 mantras, I settled on the one, shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up.
That's what I wanted to hear. That's what I wanted to hear.
It's funny because I got back, I talked to somebody who's a big rock and movie star and not terribly bright. And when, they said, they asked, what, they were very intrigued that I had gone to India and learned all these things. And they said, what did you learn? And I said, the best mantra is to go inside, take your internal dialogue and go, shut the fuck up, 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 until you do. And then I found out a few weeks later that she was going up and down the streets looking at people going, shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up. She didn't realize it was supposed to be on the inside.
What other besides? I mean, I wanted to hear you say that. So I say these things to people and they think I'm making stuff up sometimes. So I want it to come from your mouth. Usually,
no, you don't have to make stuff up about me. I do all kinds of crazy ass stuff. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. If it works, I keep doing it.
If it doesn't,
mostly the rule of thumb is what I call the spider test. When I teach week-long seminars, I tell them at the beginning, the first day, that I'm going to bring snakes and spiders and cockroaches and all of these things. And that, we always do it in a building that's tall so we can test heights. And I said, and everybody's going to get a chance. And somebody will freak out and run out of the room, on the first day. And when we bring them back in and I talk to them, they they go, well, the idea that there's a spider. And I go, so you're afraid, and I'm not bringing the spiders for 7 days. I said, are you just warming up, or what's the story here? And they'll always go, well, the fact that you're going to scares me so much. And I go, so it doesn't require a spider to be afraid. What you're afraid of, and when you ask them, it's never a little spider in their mind. It's always the size of a lobster and moving towards them. And which is a good formula to scare the crap out of yourself. Is it smart? No. And when you change the picture, it changes the way you feel. And therefore, 7 days later, they'll be holding a spider in their hand, taking selfies. I've been doing this for so many years, I can't tell you. And, I can predict what will happen. Somebody's looking at the snake terrified, and then 20 minutes later, they're touching the snake. And then they're going back over and over and over again, taking selfies with it in the afternoon.
You did that on WABC TV with Strahan, right?
Michael Strahan. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I have that video also. I think I sent that out as part of the promotion for this. I'm going to ask you one more question, probably. Then I'm going to let people ask questions, and I'll just jump back in every now and then with another question. People always talk about having low self-esteem, and right now everybody's talking about anxiety and stress. In your book, you address these things. But
yes, I do.
Can you just give us a little bit what's in the book about handling stress and self-esteem? I mean, anxiety and self-esteem?
Well, see, self-esteem is a concept. It's not an experience. And, the psychotherapists have been talking about high self-esteem and low self-esteem. And, I'm always visualizing steam coming out of somebody's ears. It's just a ridiculous way to talk about it. That, whenever you have bad feelings, they're the result of whatever you think about. And if you talk to yourself in a really nervous voice and go, and if you're going for a job interview and you're going, oh shit, I'm going to screw this up and it's going to be bad, and you have a tension in your internal dialogue and pictures of how you can fail, always with public speaking phobias, or anxiety about public speaking. When I teach public speaking courses, I'll ask people, what do you have to think about to make yourself that nervous? Like, if I were to fill in for you for a day and do your bad feelings for you, what would I have to do? And it's amazing. People go, well, in their mind, they see an audience of people with small bodies and large heads, and the heads breathe in and out, and they have unblinking eyes, and and they hear themselves stuttering, which is enough to make anybody nervous. And most of the time, people don't even realize they're doing it conscious. It happens so fast. But if you can slow it down and recode it into something that's better. Basketball players in the NBA don't sit at home and imagine missing shots, or they wouldn't be in the NBA very long. I get major league athletes all the time that go into a slump. It's always the same thing, which is they have a bad game and they keep revisualizing it instead of thinking how to do better. You want to practice success from every angle and every imaginable direction to create expertise. And this isn't just true about top-notch athletes. It's even more true about the rest of us. The everyday things we have to do. You need to see yourself succeeding and imagine all the variations of how to succeed, so that when you're in the real world, you have the best chance of knowing what to do. Where if all you do is imagine yourself failing, shyness is a perfect example of this kind of thing. And most people think shy people think that they're going to, it's either they're afraid of rejection, but most of the time they literally say to you, I don't think people will like me, which means they're really not thinking that they will. And if they start thinking that people will like them, they'll go out and meet some, and they'll discover the secret, which is that you'll like some of them and some of them you won't. You'll walk up to somebody and say hello, and they'll turn around and go, get away from me, you piece of crap. And you could say to yourself, boy, I could have married this person and put up with it for 50 years. Better cross that off the list and move on to the next thing until you find somebody that likes you for you. And in the class that I just taught here in Texas, I put a lot of emphasis on the people, because they're all practitioners of NLP in varying degrees, everything from trainers, master practitioners, and practitioners, was to teach them how to zero a client's kinesthetics. Like, our nervous system was originally designed to have stress once or twice a month. You know, a tiger came out and you got all amped up and ran away, or you almost fell off a cliff and you catch something. But our nervous system is tested 100 to 1,000 times a day. I watch people and their telephone buzzes in their pocket and they get all stressed out. You know, what the hell? It could be something horrible. You know, they start visualizing bad things that just between the time they answer the phone or a text message. You know, and when things get bigger, they get more stressed out. So they don't know how to go back to zero. We have two nervous systems, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And if one fires off, the other is supposed to trigger off and bring it back to zero. So on a scale of minus 100 and a scale of plus 100, most people think resting is plus 300. And so they don't go back to zero. They don't know what it is to be calm. And this is what makes energy work and meditation and hypnosis and NLP powerful, because we concentrate on getting that zero state to be where it ought to be, so that you go into the resting thing and then ask questions. And this is done with your internal dialogue, because if you ask what can go wrong, you'll find it. If you ask how can things get better, you'll find it. You need to ask the right question to get the right answer.
Yep. I always tell people the quality of life is going to be determined by the quality of their questions to themselves first and then to other people. I want to rerun something.
If the answer is, I don't know, then you have to ask other people.
Right.
You can't have all the information inside yourself. You know, when I found out that literally there were all these things that psychotherapists didn't know how to do, I started finding people that had done them and asking them how they did it. And, you know, it created, you know, most of the information I created wasn't by modeling psychotherapists. It was by modeling successful people, no matter whether it was spelling or getting over depression or getting to stop drinking or taking drugs or whatever it was, you know, going to an interview and getting a job. All of these things are life skills. And having good life skills requires that you ask good questions. And when the answer is, I don't know, stop lying to yourself and ask somebody who does.
Now, what he just described also was another definition of NLP, an attitude and a methodology that leaves a trail of techniques.
That's correct. That's the description I have given for years.
Yes, and you just explained it perfectly.
Techniques become antiquated as the years go by.
Right.
Better questions we ask, the better people we talk to. There are a whole lot of techniques that I used in the 80s that I would never use now. They seem ridiculous.
Right.
And yet there are people out there going, that's the real NLP. You know,
the real NLP is always evolving.
That's right. Always.
That's the real NLP, at least to me.
Well, I look at NLP itself, given the recursive nature of the meta model and those things, it's a way to think about thinking. So it's evolutionary in nature. You know, that if you're not using it to evolve yourself, and unfortunately, a lot of people became NLP trainers because they wanted to be admired. And then once they were admired, they just stopped learning things and started being what I refer to as a dickhead. And whether it's NLP or anything else, if you become an expert and the quest for knowledge disappears, you'll just become a dickhead. That's all there is to it. We all had them as college professors. You know, they think they're so smart, you know, and they're teaching literature, but they've never written a book. You know, I had a music critic once tell me, you know, that him and a producer had decided that a musician, it was my client's, a solo on an album had too many notes. And I looked at the client, and the client looked at the producer and the music critic, and he said, which notes specifically do you want me to take out? And of course, neither one of them could play, so they couldn't answer the question. They didn't know one note from another. That was, you know, they just decided there was too many notes, and they were sure they were right. And that whether they could make a better song by having less notes or not. The question is, which notes are they going to be? And expertise, you know, without skill, you know, it's when an X becomes a has-been and a spurt becomes a drip under pressure.
You know, I encourage everyone to go out and get the book, Legacy of the Master, because there's so many. Not only is it written, but you can also hit the QR code, take a picture of QR code and get the actual interview. Because there's so many different pearls of wisdom that he drops in this, especially if you're an NLP practitioner. Now, if you're not an NLP practitioner, it's a good book to get because you'll see what's possible for you as a human being by just listening to some of the stories and going through some of the exercises that he talked about in the particular book. So that's, and hey, Rich, it's the first time I've ever seen you put scripts in a book, because I don't know you to work from scripts. I always know you to create on the spot, whatever hypnotic or trance state you're going to put someone in. But in the book, I think I saw 3 or 4 scripts. So how did that happen?
Well, what I did was took 4 hypnotic transcripts from the neurohypnotic repatterning course that I teach in the summer.
Okay.
And I transcribed them and then edited out a lot of it. Probably 2/3 of it is edited out. But we left it so that you could hit the QR code and listen and watch the video itself of the transcript, so that people would, because a lot of people don't have a lot of experience of doing good hypnotic trances and getting results. They may not know how to set up finger signals. So literally you can go to the index and look up finger signals and go to the QR code and take that part out of that video and just watch that little bit. I wanted this so that people that, we're in the business of coaching, being doing counseling, therapy, whatever they were doing, in whatever format, that they could actually see it being done, more like a live seminar.
Right.
I always thought you really have to be there in a seminar to learn to get good at this. I mean, you talked about having 20 certificates. Most of my good students have been to, multiple seminars. And, that's one of the reasons why I try to make them fun. But that was the core of the book. Then I started writing how you applied the different things that are in that to do different things. So that if somebody has Tourette's, or if somebody stutters, or if somebody has this, where do you start? And this is not like the only protocol, but it's a place for everybody to start so that they can get results with lots and lots of different things. It took us quite a while to do this, and I had to dictate most of it so we could have the QR codes.
You also have things in there for vision that you didn't mention. A lot of people wearing glasses that you may be able to help people reset their vision. It may not be perfect, but it may be better than it was before. You have things in there for people who have strokes. You have a lot of information in to help people overcome these challenges or rebalance themselves.
Well, when clients would come to me and they would, they had a stroke of some kind, and and as a result, there were people that were told they'd never speak again. I was told I'd never walk again.
Right, I remember
one time, and I knew better, because doctors only know what they know. They don't know everything, and a lot of it has to do with your beliefs and your tenacity. And I just simply wouldn't accept what they told me. And it's like when I've had clients that came to me and they told my first wife that she had something like 3 months, that this terrible disease she got would kill her, and she lived 11 years. I think the best thing about her is she just didn't have a very good memory, so she forgot what they said. She asked me when she goes, "How long am I supposed to live?" And I go, "Really long time." And to me, when I have people come in and I look at the neurology of it. For example, the motor cortex, almost 1/3 of it has to do with the mouth. And so when I had somebody that had tics in their face, or Tourette's where they were jerking around or something, I put them in a trance and set up a thing where the very first sensation that they're feeling it would shoot to their mouth and force them to smile, take a deep breath, and sigh. And sighing is the neurological signal that you've finished. You eat a big meal, you push back, you sigh. You have vigorous sex. When you stop panting, the first thing you do is sigh. Sighing is a neurological period mark. And so when I had them smile involuntarily rather than twitch involuntarily and take a deep breath and sigh, it stops the process. And I would set up a post-hypnotic suggestion, so they'd go into stress, the behavior would start, I could test to see that they smiled and sigh, and it would stop. And I'll run it round and round and round like a loop and build a new cortical pathway so that they stop engaging in this behavior. Because I had people that came in with Tourette's that were told that even though it was humiliating, even though it was embarrassing, that they were just going to have to learn to live with it. And, you know, that was the best that person had. And of course, that doesn't mean that's all there is. And, you know, I had a person who was not supposed to be able to walk again. They'd had some kind of spinal damage and, you know, literally hypnotically grew imaginary nerves and used hyperesthesia so they could feel the bottom of their feet and put these poles hypnotically out of their head that had balance beams that would buzz if they went the wrong way, and got them up and walking without a walker. And I had Paul McKenna and I saw a guy one time. Paul McKenna brought this guy to me, and he was told he had hysterical blindness. So we went through and got it so he could see again. Took a couple of sessions. First, we got the sight back, then we got shape clarity, and then we added color at the end. And then the doctor called Paul back and said, oh, it was a mistake. You know, we've gone back over the MRIs and everything. And it's neurological. Don't waste your time seeing the guy. So Paul brought a film crew and the client into the doctor's office. And of course, the guy can see now. And what the guy had told me he wanted to be able to do is to see his child's face. And I got him so he could not only see his child's face, he could count the lines on their lips. And brought him into the doctor, and the doctor kept telling the guy goes, I can see your face. And the guy would hold up fingers and he'd tell him how many fingers it is. Right. And the doctor kept going like that, like, this is not possible. The test says this, it's not possible. Well, sometimes the impossible is possible. It happens all the time. You know, since the beginning of time, people have been talking about miracles, and miracles, you know, are a good thing. And, you know, when we believe in the power of ourselves and the power of the universe in which we live and our deities that control it, there's no limit to what can happen.
Right.
To decide that the universe was created randomly means you're a bad physicist, because it's highly organized from the beginning of time to now. It all started as stardust, and that's what we're made out of. And and there's a big glare on that.
There you go. That's better now. Let me see.
Yeah.
That's the light shining on you. I can't
The
have the
name
light
is
shining.
bold enough you can't miss it. You know, this is the legacy I want to leave behind. Is the legacy of hope. That, you know, no matter how bad it gets, if you get smart enough, you can find a way around it.
The legacy of hope is the legacy you want to leave behind.
Yeah,
I like that.
The legacy I leave behind are all the people I've trained. 53 years I've been training people, seeing clients. You know, I've trained everywhere: Australia, Japan, England, all over the world. I've got students that have come from everywhere, South Africa, every place under the sun. And, you know, there are people secretly in Iran doing NLP because, you know, that would be, you know, because if they got caught, it would be a bad thing. You know,
Yes.
some places it's an underground movement. When I started out, you know, people thought that I would encounter tremendous resistance from the field of psychiatry and psychology. And they actually became my best clients because, you know, when I could teach them to do something that actually worked, they were very receptive to it. You know, I don't think they believed that they would ever be able to just have a client come in with a phobia and walk out without it. That, you know, that wasn't in the scope of their system. That was what the territorizing I had to do to an entire field.
Right.
And whether it's becoming a better businessman, whether it's becoming a better physicist, a better bootmaker, a better basketball player, you know, I've had a baseball player who came and told me that, you know, he thought his career was over. And it showed me all of these x-rays and all of this stuff. And when I looked at the x-rays, I figured out what made it hard for him to throw the ball the way he used to, because, you know, he had wear and damage. But I literally calculated mathematically the angle of least resistance, and he ended up throwing a fastball 10 miles an hour faster than he ever had. And, you know, it's accept what's there and utilize it. And that if you give up hope, you stop trying. Had I believed the doctor that told me I'd never walk again and never walked, I would not have got my legs back.
Right.
And, it's just that way that, whoever read the MRI and told me that might be an expert on MRIs, but they're not an expert on hope. And
There
they're
you
not an
go.
expert on tenacity. They're not an expert on determination. And they certainly don't know me very well.
All right. I like that. They were not an expert in hope. Y'all keep that in mind when the doctor gives you a diagnosis. They're not an expert in hope, okay, or determination. I'm going to let them, I'm going to start.
In this country, the law requires them to give you the worst outcome. Even when they give you a medication, they're required to tell you what bad things can happen. You are not required, however, to believe them.
Right. All right, I'm going to start with the question and answer period now, because I mean, I could ask a bunch of questions. We can go on forever. I mean, I really enjoy this. Only thing I want to ask you before they ask the questions, are they typing them in, or are they going to put their hand up, Leslie? Which way are they going to do it?
Please, if you have a question, you put your hand up and we
Okay.
will ask you to unmute and you can ask your question.
And once again, if you came on late, the way we're formatting the question is, my question is. Richard doesn't want to hear the whole story. He just want to know what your question is so he can answer it. Richard, one last thing.
I don't care about that.
He don't care about the narrative. Just ask the question.
One quick question. If I know the answer, I'll tell you. If I don't know, I'll say I don't know.
How is Glenda doing?
Glenda's doing superbly.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask you also. I haven't met her yet, but I look forward to meeting her if I come down this summer.
Yeah.
To Orlando.
My mother was very proud. The Jewish boy married a doctor.
Okay, let's go to the questions.
Hi, good evening. It's Stacy. How are you? How are you?
Wait a minute, where's your face at, Stacy? Oh, there you go. All right.
How are you, Dr. Richard Bandler? So great to be here with you. Thank you, Jeff.
You're blurry. You're blurry. Stay straight. There you go.
You need to tilt your screen down a little bit.
Okay, I'll unblur it. How that? There we go.
There you go.
Oh, that's very nice.
I did
like the art.
Okay, my question is, you just mentioned find the space of least resistance. Did you mean that you found the space of least resistance on his body, that person who you was talking about threw the ball, and how did
right. Instead of throwing overhand, he had to throw sidearmed. And he had never done that. He was, he was, to start with, he was left-handed. He had a mighty fastball, but he threw overhand. But he had damaged his shoulder enough and had enough surgery that the way in which it was worn, it was painful for him to throw the ball that way. And so what we did is found out where the least amount of damage was, looked at the x-rays, and I calculated it, and then literally put his arm at something and had him start moving in slow motion with what would create the fastest motion given the nature of the muscles that are there. And, because baseball players, a lot of the thrust is they throw their leg up, they throw their body back, and it's a whole body movement. So I had to create a whole body movement that went in the place, instead of where it went somewhere else. So it wasn't just getting his arm to go in a different direction. I had to get his whole body to twist up in a different direction so that when he unloaded, it would come out at high speed. And then he had to remaster the curveball and the other things because it changed everything about it. But after a few months of practice, because he knew how to throw a curveball, he just had to learn to throw it from a different place. So I had to finger it slightly different so that his accuracy went up. And yeah, and he extended his career by, I think, 7 years.
Thank you. So you used his body. I thought that you also had some NLP workings in the background that did something also.
None of that stuff existed then.
Okay, thank you.
We had to do it the old-fashioned way and do it in here in the brain. I had to visualize this stuff. I worked a lot with Moshe Feldenkrais, and Moshe Feldenkrais did a kind of body work that was, compared to everything else out there, miraculous. I saw him work with a kid once who was paralyzed, arms and legs, and couldn't swallow. He had a tube down his mouth and had never said a word. And he was about 6 years old. And 45 minutes later, he had him swallowing, talking, saying a few words, and moving his arms and legs. And if you look him up, They just re-released, I helped him write a book years ago, and called The Elusive Obvious.
Yeah.
And that book has been re-released by somebody else. The publishing company went out of business, and the book was out of print for 10 years. And I just noticed nobody even told me, but I found it on the web, on Amazon. It just popped up, and somebody else went in and wrote an introduction and re-released the book. Moshe passed away years ago, so they had to have gotten his relatives' permission somehow.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Stacy. Next. Let's see who's next. Karen Brown, speak up.
Good
You need to be
evening,
quiet in
Dr.
that room, dear.
I actually have pulled over on the side of the road. I'm in my
Oh,
car. I
okay.
have the light
Never
on in
mind.
the car. Dr. Bandler, I'm very excited to speak with you. Jeff, thank you for arranging this. My question is it possible to
Yes.
correct, okay, someone's behavior without their participation? I pretty much
Well,
want,
they have to participate at some point. Maybe not maybe not conscious, but I've worked with teenagers that were, less than cooperative. But the nice thing is that if you understand how people are not participating, you could typically use it, because I've had people walk in and say, there's no way you're going to put me in a trance. And when I look at them and I go, there's no way I'm going to put you into a trance. I'm not going to help you to relax. You don't want to relax. You don't want to feel good. You don't want to have control over your nervous system. You don't want your memory to improve, and you don't want to smile more of the time. And pretty soon they'll go, blah, 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 blah. You have to be persuasive sometimes with people. And a lot of that's done with something called chiding. And that's what I was giving you an example of, is chiding somebody. Of course, you don't want to be happy without a reason. That would be terrible. You might be happy all day wrong for absolutely no reason. That would be awful. And that kind of humor, chiding humor, is very hard for people to resist. And Jeff will verify I use it all the time.
maybe that's where he learned it.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's where he learned it.
Thank you so much for taking my question. Continue
Yes.
to be.
Never give up, and just think in your mind, all resistance is useless.
All
Futile,
resistance is
the Borg
useless.
would say.
Next person. Tisha?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for this question. I'm not a student of the Noble Center yet. I'm somewhat familiar with NLP. And my question is, like, or maybe you can also give me referrals for how can this help someone with paranoia or the related disorders that can be accompanied with paranoia, like
Did you say eating
schizophrenia?
eating disorders?
No, paranoia.
Paranoia. Well, paranoia requires a lot of planning and thinking. And if you think thoughts that give you paranoid feelings, then, depending upon how much time you do it during the day, if you do it 3 minutes here and 5 minutes there and 10 minutes here and 3 minutes there, it adds up. The currency of living is how you spend your time. And if there's anything you can control, it's your thoughts. And here's the secret. The first thing you do is take a bad picture and you make it bigger so that it feels worse. Now, everybody goes, why would I want to do that? Because it tells you you're in control. If you can make it worse, you can make it better. If you can make it louder, closer, bigger, and all of those things, and you get more paranoid, then all you have to do is shrink it down so it's about this big and start blinking it black and white. The other thing is to put a border around it, because if you put a border around images, it switches from one hemisphere to the other. Because, once you make a paranoid picture, then you come back and remember it later and it makes you feel paranoid again. So what you do is you pick your favorite color, you put a 2-inch border around it, shrink it down to the size of a nickel, and blink it black and white. And that thought will begin to not bother you so much. You try it right now. You got one?
It's not me. So
Oh,
I was
it's
just
not you.
asking,
I'm sorry. I thought it was you.
but no, it's not me, but it's great. So I was just asking if maybe like, how do I get referrals to like refer someone who's dealing with that?
Well,
You know,
one thing you can do is ask Jeff, because obviously you know who he is. He would know the people there locally. Owen Fitzpatrick is in New York someplace. You know, you can always go to the Society of NLP .com website, purenlp.com, and ask for a referral depending upon where you are. We may or may not have somebody, but they'll tell you the closest person that we trust.
Where
The
are
most
you?
important thing about a practitioner, a trainer, a master practitioner, is that they're not just a practitioner of NLP, they're a licensed practitioner of NLP, because otherwise all they need is a printer. And you can print yourself up a certificate, but if my signature is on it and it says licensed practitioner, then there's a circle R after that. And that's because it's a registered trademark.
Where
okay.
you located? Where you located, Tisha?
Well, the person that I want to refer is in Finland.
In England?
Where?
Finland.
Oh, Finland.
Finland. We have people in Finland.
Okay.
Yeah, contact purenlp.com and ask for, we've got some good people in Finland.
Pure NLP, you said?
Yeah, pure, like pure water, purenlp.com. Talk to Kathleen Lavelle, and they'll go on the computer and set you up a contact over there.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Who's next?
Hello.
Melvin?
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. My question is, following the right format, you mentioned something about altered states, and I wondered if you could elucidate a little bit more on that. Is it alpha, beta states?
Well, those are brainwave patterns, and they fluctuate all the time. It's not that somebody's in a state of consciousness. So when you do use hypnotic procedures, meditative procedures, you're trying to create an stabilized state. If you take something like an X-wave, which you can hook up to your iPhone, that measures brainwave patterns, and you look at it, it'll be going all over the place. And when you want to create things that really change people, you need to get a stable state. So, you know, and it might be alpha, it might be part delta, it might have beta, it might have theta spikes in it. The most important thing is that that you find a state and stabilize it, because most people are floating all over the place all the time. Their brainwave patterns are changing constantly. I was lucky because the military provided me these lovely devices that read brainwave patterns. And I would put them on my clients, and while I would trance them out, I could tell when they went into stable states, because I could see it, you know. And I got to the point where I didn't need the machines anymore. I could read it off their face. And it's not that one state is better than the other. Some states are better for some things than others. There are some states where people have a tendency to be more creative. So when I want people to find solutions, I might put them into an alpha state and then lead them into a state where there are repetitive theta spikes, so that they'll come up with creative solutions to their problems. You know, it's not as fixed as most people talk about, where you're either an alpha, delta, or beta. You know, they're not swimming pools. These are fluctuating brainwave patterns. And most of the devices that measure brainwave patterns are a little bit like putting a microphone over New York City. An EEG is like a microphone over New York City. It can tell when the city is awake and noisy, and then it gets more quiet at night. And if there's, you know, if there's something terrible happens, a lot of people may wake up, there's a blackout, you know, that suddenly it'll go quiet. But this is what we're looking at in brainwave patterns. Brainwave patterns are a generalization about the flow of both energy, electricity, and neurological substances like oxytocin, neurotransmitters, and serotonin and all of these things. And part of the reason I always start people off by trying to get them to laugh and smile is that it makes it easy to get them into an altered state and stabilize it. Because those neurotransmitters that go with those things, every time you smile and just turning the corners of your mouth up on the motor cortex, it's right next to what releases serotonin. So you get a certain amount of serotonin, cools the brain down a little bit. When you laugh out loud, your levels of oxytocin goes up, and it allows the brain to pattern better. And we learn by patterning. If I took a deck of cards and handed you one card a week for 5 years, you would have no idea what happened. But if I flick through them, you can see a basketball player go up and throw a basketball in a hoop. It learns by patterning. The truth is, people learn better quickly than they do slowly. And, that's a misnomer that's been around for years in psychotherapy, education, and everywhere else. Does that answer the question?
It does. You mentioned something at the beginning about want but not have. There were 3 things. Can you just repeat those again?
Yes, I can. And I will. There's things that you want that you don't have, so people want to be motivated, but they're not. That there are things that people have that they don't want, like fear, and there are things that people don't have and they don't want, so therefore they don't suspect, like enthusiasm.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Regina. Unmute yourself.
Hold on one moment. Just a little some technical difficulties. So give me a moment to get it back.
Let me know when it's back. In the meantime, I can ask Richard a question again. Because Richard said something that's very, very important. I think the NLP practitioner should have, I hope they caught it. He said that he tries, you can speak now, Regina?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask him later. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, ask your question, Gina.
Yes, my question is, in working with small children, or young children who have self-esteem issues, what's the best way to approach that?
Well, the best way to approach it is to give them something to have self-esteem about. That, and not to talk about it, and not to think about that whether they don't have it. That people get self-esteem because they do the right thing for the right reason and are given the right skills. So, if they feel stupid because they're not passing tests, then the thing to do is to teach them how to pass the tests. The reason I wrote the book, Teaching Excellence, was so that teachers, because they're asked to do things and they're not taught how to do them themselves. That, I used to go and did in-service training to teachers, and I would ask them to spell words, and over half of them couldn't spell the words themselves, couldn't do the math. They put the answers in the teacher's book for a reason. And that's a bad thing. The teacher should be able to figure out the answers. And it's not their fault. It's the fault of the educational system. Years ago, I tried to open a school in Hawaii because somebody had an empty school on a ranch. And it was a beautiful facility. It was brand new. And I got all these geniuses from around the planets, people like Buckminster Fuller, the head of the orchestra in Japan, all of these people, to agree to come and teach for 6 months for free. And it was a residential facility. I was going to just take people in. We weren't going to charge them because I had rich people that put up all the money for this. And the state told us we couldn't do it because none of these people were certified teachers. And I went, these people all have PhDs, they have doctorates. I said, we're going to teach kids to read, write, and do math the way we do, right? And then we're going to start teaching them about everything that will be out in the world as a future. We're going to spend a little time and teach them architecture, a little time and teach them aircraft design, a little time and teach this. You're going to learn math, you should learn what it's used for. And the state, and so when I looked at what they were teaching them, they had classes on how to run the overhead projector, how to make a lesson plan. Well, yeah, but you might be able to be good at making lesson plans, but if you don't know what the lessons are, if you don't have a good strategy for spelling, if you don't have a dozen strategies for art, how are you going to teach kids to love art if you can't teach them how to draw and all of these things? And they expect people to be able to do this with, second graders, that one person should know everything. You don't start having multiple teachers till you're like in junior high school. And, I think that's burdensome, and especially since they don't provide them the strategies of successful thinking. I took educationally handicapped kids, and I was told that the biggest problem was that they had low self-esteem. And the truth is, the biggest problem they had is that nobody was teaching them. And I went in, and in 1 week, for an hour a day, taught them to go from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, because I made games out of the things they couldn't do, like multiplication. I just wrote, a page that had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2s, 3, 6, 9, 12, all the way up to 100. And I did this with everything. And I said, okay, now I had 6 kids, and I had them all go down this list. So I said, take 6s. And I go 1, 2, 3, and they'd go 6, 12, 18, 24. And after they do this, and they would laugh because I go, who gets there first? So they both all try to do it as quickly as possible. They did this for an hour, and then I started going, what's 7 times 3? And they'd bang, give me the answer, because it put that chart in their mind. Most adults can't multiply anything above 10 times 10, because that was the chart they were given in elementary school. And if you go 13 times 7, they're screwed. They don't know what to do. Out comes the paper or the calculator. And, they don't teach people to think mathematically. We were getting, I had 5th graders, and I was teaching them calculus and geometry by the 3rd week, because I know how these things are done, and I would make it into a game so that it was fun to do. And when the difference between low self-esteem and high self-esteem is knowledge and enthusiasm. And the enthusiasm comes because they enjoy it. And when you teach kids to enjoy it, and the best way to do it is because you enjoy it, when you're having fun. I remember a math teacher when I was in school pulling out in the 6th grade, the teacher stopping teaching history or whatever it was, and he goes, everybody get out their math books. It's this time. We're all have to do math, because he hated math. It didn't install any enthusiasm in it. And if you get kids to realize that what it is that's impossible, when you teach them how to pass a spelling test and get 10 right, because you teach them to make pictures of the words, make the letters each a different color, read them forwards and backwards. There's no way they could misspell that when somebody goes, how do you spell color? And they have a good strategy in their head. If they do 10 words correctly, every word they look at, they'll start putting in their head right. And, you can take these kids that feel bad about themselves, and I was told once that was because they had a bad home life. Well, a lot of people have a bad home life. It's harder to change their home life than it is to change their attitude, because, there's 2 ways to look at a bad home life. One is I'm trapped by it, and one is I'm not going to live this way for very long. I'm going to be one of the people that goes out and does great things.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful.
All right. Who's next? I don't know how much time we have with Dr. Bandler. So, Rich, you have to let me know.
What?
All right. You have to let me know time-wise.
Well, we're doing good.
We're good? Okay.
I'm all right. I'm just sitting in my office talking to people through the window.
This guy, we just blanked this guy out. Just take him off so he can't ask the question. This guy right here.
Oh, okay. He looks interesting, though. I want his question.
Dr. Bandler, thank you very much for sharing everything. Noble Touch team, thank you for setting this up. I've learned a lot. Like somebody said earlier, I'm slightly acquainted with NLP. I'm not a practitioner, and I still have plenty to learn. My question is, can you talk about some of the cases, the results that you've gotten or that you've heard of from other practitioners from people suffering from Parkinson's and Alzheimer's?
Yeah, those are tough. those are really tough things because there's severe neurological damage in both those cases. And, you know, the thing about your brain, especially if you stop using it, it stops working. And, you know, my mother suffered from dementia when she was in care before she died. And she had Parkinson's as well. And the Parkinson's medicine made her hallucinate. And, you know, it says it right on the box. And, but, you know, I taught my mother how to test for what was hallucinations so she wouldn't get scared, because originally it scared the crap out of her. She would see people in her room in the middle of the night, you know, and she'd start screaming bloody murder. And then they would call me on the phone and I'd have to go out there to calm her down. And I finally said to my mother, I said, look, you know, if you see something, take your finger and poke it. Because if your finger goes through, it's just a hallucination. And a couple of days later, I was in her room and talking to her, and she goes, are we the only people in the room? And I said, why do you ask? And she said, because the person's behind you, and I want to know if it's a real person or not. And I turned around and I said, no, it's not. And she said, okay. She goes, the medicine, and said, it's this stupid stuff, you know. So there are a lot of things. A lot of the shaking in Parkinson's, I've had really good results because the mylar in the proprioceptive feedback deteriorates. And so people can't hold still. So what I have them do is to focus on their fingertips, right? And what I do is put them in a slightly altered state. I have them hold up their hand, and then I put my finger in front of theirs, and I go, all I want you to feel is the end of, you know, their hand will be shaking like this. And I'll go, all I want you to do is to focus on the end of your finger and touching mine. And then I go 1, 2, 3, and the shaking stops. Because if they're only focused on the skin and not the proprioceptive feedback, the shaking stops. The trouble is the way they've been holding still their whole life doesn't work anymore. So you have to use what's called hyperesthesia. That's the opposite of anesthesia. Anesthesia makes your fingers numb. Hyperesthesia makes them super sensitive. So you can put somebody in trance, make it so that the surface of their skin becomes more sensitive, so that when they reach for glass, rather than the glass shaking, they can only feel their fingertips on it. And that's how the muscles tell each other what to do. When you reach out towards a glass, your hand moves slow and then really fast at the last minute. When you touch it, it switches all the muscles to other muscles, and you slowly go up and then quicker to the lips. That's the design of the nervous system. Knowing this means that you can get a lot of the shaking to disappear because you get people to focus on their fingertips and you make them extremely sensitive. And then you hypnotically go in and turn off a lot of the proprioceptive feedback. That's how we know our arm is here behind us, even with our eyes closed. But if they focus more on the sensitivity of the skin, a lot of the shaking disappears, which is, you know, my mother was a painter and stopped painting because the shaking got so bad. And she used to write people notes all the time, and she stopped writing. And then she literally asked me, she said, well, I can hold my hand still, you know, when I'm getting a glass, but when I pick up a pencil, why does it still shake? And I said, because you're not extending your feeling from your fingertips to the end of the pencil so that you can feel the pencil in your hand. You're going back to the old proprioceptive of knowing these motor movements that you used for years. You have to learn again how to use your hands in a different way. And, you know, with the memory from Alzheimer's, you know, that gets plaque on the brain, but, you know, our neurochemistry is powerful enough to defeat a lot of that. My mother was much better towards the end of her life than she was for a year before, because she actually improved her memory. That, you know, I actually hired people to do things with her all day long so that, you know, I could keep her busy, to play poker, all the things she used to do. But she had to, you know, when they put her in the rest home, there weren't people there to do it with. You know, everybody was already planning to deteriorate. And, you know, that's the plan. Here I am. It's time to play bingo. My mother goes, my mother literally said, she goes, I'm not playing bingo. I'm not doing it. She goes, I'm not doing any of that stuff. That's old people stuff. And she was 91. She didn't want to do old people stuff. I think that's a good plan. I'm not going to do old people stuff until I'm 103.
That must be a magic number, 103. I still want to live to 103. What quality of life, though? Quality of life.
Quality of life, quality of life.
Mm.
Good
Yes, sir.
evening, good evening, Dr. Bandler.
Good evening. What's your name?
My name is Jimmy.
Jimmy?
Yes.
Okay,
And-
Jimmy. You have a
my-
question?
Yes. My question is, what is the difference between streamlining a strategy and artificial design? And when do you know which one to use?
Well, streamlining was when we used to teach NLP back in the 80s, we elicited strategies from people, and a lot of them had loops. They had loop and loop and loop, and they went on and on and on and on. And so we started doing things like limiting the number of loops, that number of times that you could go through things. Like if you're going to make a decision, you should be able to make it in 5 loops, but it's always controlled by the auditory in front of it. Like, what would I most want for lunch? What would be the best car for me to drive out of the ones I've seen, and instead of going through and constantly testing each one and trying to create a meta feeling that makes it so that, you're absolutely right all the time. There are a lot of people that they even buy things and then they're still deciding afterwards. That's where buyer's remorse comes from, because they don't have that solution. Artificial design. See, when NLP was designed, both John Gritter and I were mathematicians. And to mathematicians, when you build a model, the most perfect model is the most elegant model. To make every sound in English is only 10 on-off switches. You're either parsing your lips or not. You're either blowing air or not. Your tongue is either on the roof of your mouth or not. And these 10 on-off switches create all the sounds in English. And so that's considered a very elegant model because it takes the least number of things to do the most number of things. Now, when we designed NLP, we designed to streamline strategies so that they would be the most elegant, so you get the most with the least, basically. And at a certain point in time, I discovered that my clients were more functional, but they weren't that interesting. And so I started upping the game. I took the whole model and flipped it over. What if we designed something that was inelegant, but the criterion became enjoyable, fun, exciting? So instead of having one internal dialogue, I went out and literally recorded 300 Black people in a church saying all these different things. And then in my office, I had big speakers, and, so I would install strategies. I had actually a holophonic recording system that I could go out portably and record things and then put in my office and design and install strategies, which maybe weren't the most elegant. Instead of one voice, there might be 5 voices. And instead of, having, one good solid feeling to make a decision, you would have something that was extremely wonderful, that instead of motivating yourself with a certain amount of stress, you throw the stress out the window and make it so that they're attracted to getting things done, almost becoming a compulsive about it so that they become an achiever. And, achievers can either achieve because they're stressed out or because they're enthralled by what they're doing. And I make literal decisions. Design human engineering, may not be elegant, but it's highly effective.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. Who's next there? Michelle.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for spending your time with the Noble Touch. And my question is, as we go into the world, our daily commuting on the train or on the bus, or even walking on Fulton Street, and we encounter emotionally disturbed people, what advice or suggestions could you give us that could help them, but also keep us safe? Or
That's a good word, safe.
okay.
I used to live in San Francisco and I would get accosted by literally crazy ass people some of them on PCP and crack and all kinds of stuff. And, you know, there was a guy that wore a sandwich board on the corner, and as you'd walk by him, he would accost you, and not in a pleasant way, and going, the end is coming, the end is coming, Jesus is coming back. And finally one day I turned and looked at him and I said, oh man, he was here last week, you missed him, and just walked on. That sometimes disagreeing with people doesn't work, but when you take it a little further than them and you do it cheerfully, you know, that's not the response they're really looking for. You know, it's their way of getting, see, in the world, the squeaky wheel has a tendency to get the grease. And so they become squeaky wheels to get attention and sometimes to get money. And, you know, people will give them a few bucks to leave them alone and stuff like that. I have a tendency to be so happy they don't want to be around me. And I find that's highly effective. I smile at them and I go, and, you know, I remember looking at this one guy who was pounding his head against the wall. And I literally looked at him and I said, is that working? Right. And he went, what? And I said, well, I have thoughts I'm trying to get out of my head too. Right. Went over and hit my head on his place. I said, that place doesn't work, and just walked on. That, you know, that you get too serious with these people, they can get violent, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, and luckily our president is importing more and more people into this country, and there's less and less room for the squeaky wheels. So we have to be careful. And, you know, as I took somebody one time to Puerto Vallarta, and we were going out in the ocean, and they kept looking at the beach. And I said, never turn your back to the ocean. And of course, they didn't listen to me. A wave hit them and their glasses came off, and then they couldn't see at all. And, you know, this is the thing is, don't turn your back to the ocean. You know, you keep your eyes on them.
Eyes on them. Right. And if you cannot make eye contact, is there a word or is there something that you might also suggest?
Well, it's always context specific. You know, in general, you know, when people come up to me and they start screaming at me about something, and especially if I can't tell what they're screaming about, I always say to you, I always look at them and go, you're absolutely right, and walk away, because you can't argue with that. I find arguments and couples, everything else, if somebody would just say, you're absolutely right, that would be the end of it.
End of it. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Bandler. Blessing.
Yeah. Okay, you got 8 more minutes, Jeff.
Okay. Let me ask a question real quick.
Hello.
Remember? You got to unmute yourself.
Mute.
Okay, now you got
Yes, I already did. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you for doing this. And my question is, how can I help my mom? She was diagnosed with cancer. I guess that's very general, but that's
Well, it's very
basically
general. I'm not a medical doctor. I can't give you medical advice. And
no,
you know,
yeah,
there's different kinds of cancers and different kinds of treatment, but all treatments work better if you believe they're going to work. And
yes,
I wrote a book years ago called Using Your Brain for a Change, which has just been re-released. And it literally tells you in there how to change a belief. And if you build a big giant belief that says your medication is going to work, even if you're going to take antibiotics, you should believe they're going to work. And the more you believe it, because every drug is tested against placebos, and which means we know more about placebos than anything. And placebos, they told me years ago, the Federal Drug and Food Administration, a guy told me, he said, placebos work because people are deceived. And that's not true. They actually work because you believe. If you believe something is going to work, sometimes a sugar pill will work as well as a painkiller. And, you know, I've given people jelly beans. I told them they were magic jelly beans and got them to believe that they were going to get rid of their migraines, and they would take the jelly beans and their migraines would disappear. And diabetics shouldn't use jelly beans. They should use something else. Chicken wings, I don't care what it is. But if they're going to go through severe treatments, my daughter had cancer, and she remained very optimistic and believed the treatments are going to work, and they did. And that's the best thing you can do, is to keep her cheerful, because
Well,
when you worry about a sick person, they now have two problems. They have to make you feel better and themselves feel better, and that
well,
makes
it's
it.
the opposite. She's I believe in all that you just said. Sorry, my English. I speak Spanish first
That's okay, I
language.
understand it.
Yes, and yeah, I believe all of that. But my mother is she has a lot of loops, thoughts, negative thoughts, and how do you say that? She's not a cheerful person. She's not a
Well,
cheerful.
you have to
And,
explain. You have to explain
but
to her that thoughts can be poisonous. You know, part of the way you cure cancer is they give you chemo, and what chemo is poison, and the weakest cells die first.
yeah,
Right now,
she doesn't want to do that.
she doesn't want to do chemo.
No,
Well,
no,
yeah, but I'm not saying she should do chemo. I'm saying
yeah.
that's how it works, right?
Okay.
With thoughts, it's just the opposite. That when she thinks that a bunch of negative thoughts, right, it poisons everything. And so you have to teach her a technique to replace these loops. And you know, if something is making her have a negative attitude, then whatever she's thinking about, you have to replace the pictures. And things like the swish pattern and changing the size and the distance of these things and turning them upside down, crazy stuff, turning them sideways and putting another picture in their place. And you must know enough of her history to know things that she did that were funny and cheerful. Everybody has a few in their life somewhere. And if she just learns to artificially replace good memories with bad memories, after you do a few of those, it starts happening by itself. But you have to smile while you do it. You can't worry about her too much. That just makes it worse. You have to go in and go, look, we're going to do this. And if she goes, I don't want to, you go, well, that's too fucking bad. We're going to do it anyway because it will make me feel better. You don't want me to suffer as well as you, do you? You know, you have to be a little forceful. You know, when he asked me earlier, you know, how do you get these things done? And I said, you think inside your mind, your ass is mine, you're going to do this. And you get them to do it, even if it's your mother, because your mother couldn't be more obstinate than mine.
All right, thank you for your question. Susan's gonna be the last question, I think, Susan.
Hello, Susan.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Dr. Bandler, thank you for being with us. I have a question. Is there anyone that you would not use NLP with?
Me personally?
Yes, personally. Yes.
Yeah, there are a whole lot of people that I wouldn't want to help, to tell you the truth. They asked me to work one time with serial killers, and I said, you got to be fucking kidding that I'm going to waste my talents on serial killers and serial rapists and people like that. I'm fussy about my clients, especially now that I'm older. There are some people that I just don't want to work with, and I refer them to somebody else. And you know, when I have a real asshole, I think of people that have been an asshole to me, and I refer them to them. That you know, you're not obligated to fix everybody that comes across your door. And that's, you know, you should, you know, you have to take care of yourself as well as other people. You have to remain in a good state. And somebody with as interesting a room as you're in, you know, really doesn't need to get negative energy from people.
That's right. I have a sign on my door. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Bandler.
You bet.
Okay, is that it? Are we have any time for any more questions? Is that it for you? Because I'm going to end and say something, you know, after you say that's it. So is that it for you, or what's going on here? Dr. Reverend Richard Bandler.
Dr. it's doctor now.
You
They
know,
kept giving me doctorates, you know, it's a way of getting a free lecture out of me.
you know, I appreciate the time you gave us this afternoon, you know, this evening. A lot of things I asked you to repeat because I told my students this, and sometimes they hear me say it, but they don't know if it's true or not. So I want them to hear that you installed this in me, this attitude of your ass is
Not
mine.
your fault, it's all my fault.
Right, thank you.
Full blame for it.
Also, Richard information, yeah, they put pure NLP in there already, and you know, put our information there also. It's our NLP certification coming up in September, and I still do the 6-month model, Richard. I do a weekend
You're
a
in
month.
one place, you can afford to do that, you know, and I think that's a good way to do it. That's the way I used to do it.
Right, I'm following what I learned.
Yeah. That, you know, people should actually do more than one, you know, to me, that prac course that we do the week-long course in July. And, you know, but that's to give people a foundation. And the more time you spend, like when you do it, where what do you do, like a weekend a month or something?
You know what else I do?
And when you do it that way, people get more time to practice. And these are not, this is like learning to play an instrument. It requires practice, practice, practice.
Right.
You don't become good because a certificate hangs on the wall. You become good because you become relentless about learning. And when you're relentless about learning, you not only get highly skilled, you also get a better life as a byproduct of it. Because, you know.
But the other thing I do, Richard, is I actually bring people in from the outside for them to start working on after the third weekend. So I bring people in that they don't know, that they have to practice the techniques on after the third weekend. They start working on real people that have no idea what they're doing. It's easy to be in the class and correct each other and know the steps you're supposed to follow. When you bring someone in from the outside that have no idea, they just know they have a problem they want you to solve and get results. That's what I do after the third weekend.
Yeah, there's no shortage of people that need help. And that's a good way to do it, you know. The proof is always in the pudding.
Results is all that matters. I don't care about theories.
Don't practice on, quote, real people, because we're all real people. And the question is the quality of the people and how much they know. And actually, the more they know, the more difficult they get sometimes. So, you know, getting them to practice on people in the world provides a service for your community as well as the people that are learning, which is a good thing. Because as I told a psychiatrist one time, he said, if I use these techniques, he said, I'm going to destroy my private practice.
Oh, I heard somebody say that too.
What?
I heard someone say that too.
Yeah, well, when he said it to me, I said, do you really think on planet Earth we're going to run out of crazy people?
I didn't say that, though. I just said you're just selfish.
No, well, both are probably true, but you're not going to run out of crazy people on this planet. You know, there's just plenty of them around. So, you know, whether you go into private practice or you do groups or whatever you do, trust me, you're not going to run out of crazy people on planet Earth.
I want to encourage everyone to buy the book, Legacy of the Master. I want to encourage you also, if you have, I got to get this thing straight. I got to encourage you. Oh, look at that bright smile. Okay, and I move up some. Yes, something like this. I want to also encourage you to pick up any other. Richard, you just mentioned that the other book, Using Your Brain for Change, is coming back out again.
It has come back out again in 5 languages.
If you don't have that book also on your NLP practitioner, especially one of my students, get that book also because you learned about submodalities, and that book has a lot of information about submodalities in it. And you know how powerful submodalities are from the class we took. So I encourage you to buy that book. And especially
they're on Amazon. All of these publishing houses and stuff, most of them have gone out of business over the years. You know, so I got back 12 or 13 titles. And what we did is revise them a little bit. And then I got students of mine that run institutes to translate them. So the Spanish translation is done by a master practitioner, not by some translator that doesn't know what they're talking about. Because people were always coming up to me telling me how bad translations are. So Using Your Brain for a Change has just been re-released all of them will have a little sign in the corner that says new edition. So be careful when you buy them. There's a lot of old editions running around. Get new editions. But there are things like The Secrets of Being Happy. It was, that publishing company went out of business in under a year.
Wow.
So what happened was the paperbacks were being sold for like $350, which is ridiculous for a paperback book. So I re-released it, and now it's back to $12 or something. Something.
If you think about 3 of your books, if you said, you know what, I have enough to invest with in 3 of Rich's books, which books would you tell me the most important 3 books they should invest in?
Using Your Brain for Change, Teaching Excellence, and probably the new one. If I had to pick 3, that would be it. I try to make every book a little different than the others so that they don't, repeat themselves.
Right.
I on a project and take on a new direction, it's because I want new information. And, when people say, why are you still writing more books? And, this is part of the legacy I'll leave behind. And these books all represent something different. When I rewrote The Structure of Magic, it came out as a book about problem solving. It's called Problem Solving. And, it updated something that hadn't been updated since, 1975. So, it was due for an update, and we discovered over time that the model was a problem-solving model. It wasn't a model of what psychotherapists did. In fact, when psychotherapists did it, the transcripts have no end in the book because they weren't good at finding solutions. And the way we designed it is so that people could find solutions to problems, because that's what it's all about, is problem solving. What they call mental disease most of the time is just bad problem solving, bad planning.
All right. Richard, I got a question for you. You said this body of work is going to be your legacy. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you've already impacted the entire world. I know you've definitely impacted me and people that I've come in contact with, and life that I've changed based on your technology. If you can call it, it's really based on your art. It's not really just a technology to me. NLP is really an art. When you learn to really use it, to me, it's an art form. It's not a technology. That's just my opinion on the way I look at it. But what do you want people to know about? What about your personal legacy? This is your body of work. What do you want people to know about you, the person? Because I find you to be a lot different than people think you are. So what do you want people to know about Richard, the person?
I don't think about that. Tell you the truth, that's just not something I would ever think about.
Good time to think about it. Wait a minute, here you go. Here you go. Richard, check this out. How's this one sound? When is now a good time to think about it, isn't it? You taught me that pattern. You taught me that pattern.
Smack me in the face with my own work. See, I care about what my family thinks of me, and my wife thinks of me, and and my friends think of me. The rest of it, if I cared about what they thought about me, it would just be too taxing for me. There are people I know that are trainers, and and all they're worried about what the PR says about them, because it influences their income and things like that. And I live well enough. I'm not mega rich like, many of the people that I've had as students have become quite rich. And, but that's not my goal in life. I really believe the currency of living is how you spend your time. And I spend my time how I want to. When people ask me, when are you going to retire? I don't even think about such a thing. I'm doing what I want to do now. Why would I do something else? Stop and learn to play golf and get frustrated? I don't think so. Especially here, it's hot as hell in the summer. Not as cold as where you guys are in the winter, but it's one of those things to me that that what people will discover about me, if they really knew things about my life, is that I have been relentless. The reason I've written 35 books is that when I stop one, I'd start another. And, and I don't start another just to repeat what I did. It's because I want to learn new things and understand them better. And, I have a lifetime of experiences from which to draw. When I wrote my first book, it probably took me the longest because I didn't have as much experience to draw from. And so I had to squeeze every ounce of juice out of what I had. And now that I'm 53 years down the road from that, I'm 75, almost 75 years old. And, 3/4 of a century, you have a lot more experience. Time goes by faster because you've had more of it. When you're a kid, it takes forever to go by, a month. But,
Right.
by the time you're 40, months fly by like tick, 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 tick. That bill again already?
Yeah, that's what we said when our rent went up. That's how we knew we were on our first anniversary, because our rent went up. So yeah. And
Yeah.
but I just wanted to ask that question because like I've always found you to be just the opposite of what everyone said about you before I started training with you. As you know, they kind of
My competition doesn't compliment me, and I consider that a compliment.
Well, I know you to be a very warm, caring person about your students and everything else. Like I said, I've been through 11 classes with you. That's a lot of seeing you and a lot of understanding you and seeing how you operate amongst people and how you actually care about your students also. So I want to thank you for taking this time to speak with the students from near and far. And I'd like to thank Kathy too. Is she still in line? Kathy, you still there?
Kathleen,
Kathleen, I'm sorry.
probably not.
Kathleen, you don't think so? I think she was hanging around probably. Anyway, I
She's
think
there, but
Kathleen.
she's not, oh, her screen is closed.
Oh, I want to thank Kathleen for arranging this also. And Doc, I'll be seeing you soon. I appreciate you.
You take care. I'd like to thank everybody for hanging out, and we'll do it again sometime.
All right, Doc. God bless you.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.